Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the zoo. The minions with me tonight are SkepTock
Hi, everybody.
and Geodes.
Hello.
And of course, I'm the keeper for the night, as it is a Friday night. And I'm Sanguine. How are both of you doing tonight?
Well, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say I'm sanguine, but I'm happy and calm.
Mm-hmm.
I
How about yourself, Geodes?
yeah, I'm good. I just wrapped up my shifts, so I'm pretty happy in terms of that's over. So
Was it a good shift?
it was all right. A little bit busy. I had to start work a little early to go to a work meeting, but otherwise that was the only thing that was really out of the ordinary. So
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
At your work meetings, what did they talk about?
Usually they try to tell us how much good of a job we're doing because, there's morale is not exactly high right now, and
Yeah.
then they usually say what we need to be doing better, what to expect going forward, stuff like that. So, yeah.
I've always noticed that, or it seems this way, at least in all the jobs that I've had. They will do damn near everything in order to improve morale, except for the main thing that would improve morale,
Mm-hmm.
which is raise the pay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I could probably go into some details about what they're planning for me specifically to do. Although not necessarily me specifically, but like a few people. But at least in my line of work, I'm the only one at my office who's going to be doing this. But I don't know if I want to go into that much detail live. So
No worries, no worries at all. It's an interesting thing. Studied the effects of different kind of enhancements and inducements to motivate people in the course of my studies and my experience in the Navy. And one of the things that they found out was that increase in pay does definitely affect morale,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only for a very short period of time. In fact, the guy who, Abraham Maslow, was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You may have heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
He did some work on that, and he referred to the type of increase in motivation that comes from increasing the amount of money a person gets as hygienic, and
Mm-hmm.
it lasts as long as it's new to the person, but
Mm-hmm.
it gets routine very quickly. And what happens is the person is still faced with the same dissatisfactions from the job that they have been faced with. And unless those are addressed, uh, the person will continue to be unhappy and therefore unmotivated. Most people are unmotivated in their jobs because they're unhappy about what they have to do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a lot of reasons for that. And until management is ready to attack those and work with the person, and that pretty much has to be a partnership to get any real results, any long lasting results between management and the person. Until management shows an interest, works with that person, the person shows an interest, works with management to make the work situation better, the person, regardless of how much they're making, and the increase in amounts of pay can be really substantial, the person will still register the same level of dissatisfaction with their job. So that's just something for the back of your head. Pay is not a long-term solution to job dissatisfaction, and and if you think about it, it makes sense. Attacking the root causes of the dissatisfaction, it's kind of like the old saying, nothing happens until something happens.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're willing to attack those basic things that are causing dissatisfaction, you're not going to make any headway on it. So anyway, it's a little
I
management blurb there for you.
I wonder, and you might be able to say that they've already looked into this and provide the additional information when it comes to that. I wonder if there's a certain cutoff point when it comes to that, because I've had a lot of jobs where EMS, for example, most of the people that I worked with in EMS enjoyed working in EMS, but they also felt like we're getting paid like shit, and that caused a depression of morale.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if there's a certain point where if you're paid below that, then it is a constant drain on morale. But then once you get brought up to that point, going past that point doesn't really have a long-term effect. It's just that short one. Or if it's...
No, sure. That's a natural question to ask. I understand that. It actually has been a lot of work done with that. And here's the thing. When someone's being underpaid,
Mm-hmm.
okay, it causes other problems in that person's life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those problems. It's not the underpay itself, although underpay might ameliorate this, but it's these other things in his life, not being able to send the kid to a school that he wants to send him to, not able to afford a newer car or, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Not able to make ends meet, worried about the rent, things like that, having to work a second job. There are definitely things you can look at and say that person is not making enough money. Mm-hmm. But then when you go into why is that person not making enough money? Once again, that's something that's got to be a partnership between the employee and management. And the employee just and this is what I used to tell people I managed. I said, if you have a dissatisfaction this way, bring it to me, and we'll look at the whole situation and see what, if anything, we can do. Sometimes the right answer is to seek out a different job. Mm-hmm. And you have to do that in a very business-like and professional way. I once had a guy who was being underpaid. He knew he was being underpaid. He came to me, and I represented very hard to senior management that this guy should be paid more. He wasn't being paid as much as he should, as another guy who they were both programmers at the same mm-hmm. level. And my boss told me, I'm not paying that person the same thing the other people are making because he is a black person. He did not use that term. Mm-hmm. He was, and this guy was just a hateful old racist. Mm-hmm. And I went back and discussed it with the guy who I had working for me. And I said, hey, let's go out for a drink after work. This is in my drinking days. This is many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. And we sat there over a beer, and I told him what the situation was. And I said, I will write you a letter of recommendation. And this was after I had been on the cover of Computer World. I was a fairly high commodity at that point. Mm-hmm. And I actually got him in at Oracle. And he got almost double what he was making at the company I was at. Mm-hmm. I was very happy for him. He did very well for himself. Sometimes you have to solve the problem that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's one factor that I think should always be taken into account when it comes to are people actually being underpaid for the position versus is it just them feeling strain? That doesn't seem to be brought in as much as it should, which is, are you currently having problems gaining and maintaining staffing?
Well, yeah.
If the answer is yes,
there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that go into that. I mean, yeah, you're right. You may have a high turnover rate if you're consistently not offering competitive wages. That's why salary surveys are absolutely critical. and knowing what the competition is paying, know what the industry norms are. Those, I used to look at that stuff all the time. And the other thing is my experience is that if you stay to the high side, just slightly to the high side of the average, you'll tend to get a better cut of applicant for the jobs that you get. And and there's a sweet spot, and I don't know all the things that affect that. I just had a lot of experience with hiring, and one thing about programmers, they'll stay there for a year or so and then they move on. Just was the nature of writing application programs in the late 1990s.
Yeah, there's certain jobs that will always have that element of volatility.
Yeah, a lot of turnover, sure.
And then there's other jobs that they could have a stable workforce. It's just they aren't being competitive in their pay, and they aren't advancing people along as much as they should.
Or they don't offer a working environment that is stimulating and interesting and good enough in certain basic qualitative terms to keep somebody interested long term. Yep. But anyway, we didn't get together to talk about management stuff. That's boring.
I was just about to transfer over to the topic as well, Skep. You read my mind there. So one of the things,
sparkle in my China, shine in my Japan.
Yeah, one of the things that has been in the news.
Anybody in chat who can come up with the song that's from, you're a mensch.
What has been in the news rather recently, and unfortunately not quite as much as it really goddamn should be, are the current strains between the Chi-Coms and the Chinats, the Chinese Communist Party of mainland China and the Chinese nationalists of Taiwan, as well as just the strain of pretty much every group of people in that region and China. And there's not many people that seem to know what the hell is the deal with it. They know that there is an issue. They know that there's something about China saying that Taiwan belongs to it, and Taiwan saying, no, it doesn't. But a lot of people don't really seem to know the backstory as to how the hell we got there.
Well, what is your opinion of what's going on in China? What do you think is going on there, Sanguine?
I think there's several different things that are all taking place at a similar pacing, because there's China, I can't remember how many years ago, had a declaration that it would reunify with Taiwan by, was it 2030?
Yeah, 2030 is what they said. Yes, that's correct.
And they're realizing, shit, 2030 is only 8 years out effectively now. We need to get on that. So there's that aspect which is causing them to increase tension. There's the thing that I've mentioned a couple times on air thus far, that China seems to be gearing up for a cultural revolution part 2 in many respects, because it's limiting the number of foreigners within China, especially foreigners that are earning any sort of income. It is decreasing foreign influence, cultural influence within China by trying to prune out anyone that is deemed too Western. It is trying to restructure itself again. So it was during Nixon's term, if I remember correctly, China started to open back up economically, started to allow foreign investors, started to allow foreign companies to come in. And they did that because China was going very much the same way that the USSR did. And was fucking itself economically. So it allowed money to flood back in, and that caused China to become what it is now. But they're now decreasing the amount of foreign investment that they're allowing in China, and it looks like they're going back towards old policies, the purer Communist Party policies, if you would. So there's both of those things going on, as well as the strain of certain countries being willing to call a spade and point out where the current pandemic originated and call into question how it originated and all that stuff, which they are not fond of. And they're noticing that's eating away at their influence in other respects. So they're trying to come up with ways of seizing that influence back, while also trying to develop militarily to the point where they would be able to be a proper threat to American hegemony, and going through this cultural contraction while also looking at Taiwan going, we're almost 8 years, or we're about 8 years away from our deadline of reunification. We need to do something. So China's a bit of a mess, to say the least.
Yeah. The big thing is that since a lot of their infrastructure as well as their economy is not as stable as they're trying to claim it is, I mean, their expansion is about the only other option they have to try and keep things going, at least somewhat stably. That's really kind of where we're at. So,
and that's one of the other reasons why they're looking at Taiwan, because everyone knows China makes a hell of a lot of the stuff that is mass produced and on the market. Taiwan makes a hell of a lot of the tech as well. So it's effectively the two major tech producers, if I remember correctly, other than China, with the Western companies that have come in and started manufacturing, and then the Chinese broke down that and started their own versions of it, are Taiwan and Japan still. Is that right, Skep? Is it still Taiwan and Japan as the other two major tech component producers in the region?
Well, yeah. I mean, as far as, the ones who make the money from that stuff, that Japan is gigantic. Taiwan is definitely a factor. Listen, I'm gonna interrupt everything and ask to make an announcement, and that is this: if it's okay with everybody, wrenches who are listening in chat right now, please don't time anybody out. And if there's something offensive going on, let Sanguine know. And I'm actually signed in as Minion Sanguine, so if you need something done, let me do that. But let's just not be timing each other out. There's I understand what's going on, and I don't want anybody's feelings to be hurt. But if there's a problem, please just bring it to me, DM me, and I will, or DM Sanguine. I mean, I'm too accustomed to being a host. Sanguine, sorry. And we'll look into it and take care of anything that needs to be taken care of. We appreciate your vigilance, and we appreciate you guys staying on this. There are trolls that come in and try and wreck our streams, but just bring it to our attention, please. Thank you so much.
Yep. And if it reaches the point where we've been botted a couple times, if that happens, and I
will take immediate action.
Yeah,
I will take immediate action.
Immediate action. And if I decide that we need all hands on deck. I'll put out the general call for wrenches.
Right. But for now, let us do that, please.
Yes.
Anyway, getting back to what you're saying about Taiwan and Japan and all that stuff. All right.
Mhm.
Here's the deal. You know, it's so funny. I said, I'll just go look at a couple things on China, so I'll be ready to go on the stream tonight. And it was like 6 hours later.
Oh yeah, I have the history back to the fall of the Qing.
The Qing or the Qing? Because the Qing are really, that's where I was going to take it from. So I'm taking it from like 1872 or so.
Ah, yep.
And if you look at the what happened to China is just so fucking big.
Mm-hmm.
It's enormous. It's the kind of enormous that's difficult to get your head around, really. It's got 1.4 billion people in it. That's 1 person in 5 in the world is Chinese. Think about it. I mean, Chinese lives in China. That's more than the United States. If you had the United States, the European Union, Russia, and South America, they still have more people than all those combined. Their military is the largest in the world. It's got 2 million active duty personnel. Their annual gross domestic product is 14 trillion. That's in contrast to America's what is our GDP? 21 trillion, 20.9 trillion. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting thing because China's debt. China is making a effectively 15 trillion US dollar GDP on $2.4 trillion worth of US debt. The United States makes a 21 trillion GDP on $28 trillion US debt. You should think about that for a minute. Their debt to GDP ratio is basically 1 to 7, roughly, or 1 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Our debt to GDP, so they are 1/6 of 1. Ours is about 1.4.
Mm-hmm.
Our debt is a lot higher than our GDP. It wasn't always that way, but George Bush started borrowing money. George W. Bush started borrowing money like he meant it. Barack Obama doubled that. Donald Trump had $7 trillion more dollars. Pretty soon you're talking real money. We've really done this in the last 3 or 4 presidents. So anyway, that's kind of a sidelight. Getting back to this, they are enormously productive from a leveraging standpoint. They've done enormously well with relatively small amount of debt. The problem that they have is they have a demographic problem. What do you think China's biggest problem is? One word. Tell me what China's biggest problem is.
It's cultural. It's
demographic. No, it's demographics. It's biological. They're producing. Their families are producing. Their fertility rate is 1.6. To replace your population, you have to have 2.1. Okay, to compensate for deaths and maintain a different population, meaning that China, before long, is going to shrink. In China, almost 40% of the population are between the ages of 30 and 54. Think about that.
Yeah,
this large
group contraction with that.
Well, listen to this. This large group is going to live longer than previous generations of Chinese, thanks to improved healthcare and the like, and living conditions are better, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you consider this in conjunction with the fact that fewer babies are being born, you can see that the median age in China is going to skyrocket. I was reading something, it was a Pew report, and the median age right now is 35. By 2050, the median age in China, half below, half above, is going to be 46 years old. Half the people are going to be over 46 years old.
And they're already
Yes.
experiencing a lot of burnout at the younger generations.
Absolutely. No, as the elderly become more numerous and fewer economically productive citizens are born to replace them, what's going to happen is you get something called the dependency ratio shift that is very negative. The ratio of the working population to the non-working population is going to rise significantly. What that means is that there will be more elderly people relying on Social Security and pensions or their equivalents of those things, which they have, with fewer people paying taxes to fund them. This is going to be a huge strain on the country, and it's likely the only viable solution is going to be raising taxes. That's going to be happening at the same time that China's labor force is shrinking. All right.
Oh, they're already trying to do a lot in order to increase the productivity. So the number of hours
they're never going to outrun that Sanguine.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying they are.
Their increased labor costs will damage its manufacturing and export industries.
Oh yeah, I know.
And who's going to be sitting there waiting to take up the slack? Everybody.
The third world.
Everybody. Well, Malaysia's sitting there like a hungry young tiger. Japan is always.
Yep.
Japan has the world's third highest GDP. They're like $8 trillion, and so a low fertility rate is going to lead to other problems too. Right.
And I was bringing up the increase in work hours for another aspect that I forgot to mention when I was bringing up the current situation in China.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a, not quite revolution, but a mass apathetic demonstration going on in China when it comes to their working age professionals. Have either of you heard of laying flat? It's the English translation of the trend going on in China at the moment.
No, what is that?
Laying flat is exactly what it sounds like. It is people that have decided that they're checking out, and in their protest of checking out, they are just laying flat. They aren't going to work. They aren't going out and being productive. They're just laying flat. And it has reached the point where
it's actually called lying flat.
Lying flat, okay.
Just because I have a laying prejudice.
Fair enough. So
I have heard of this. I have heard of this, yes.
Yeah, and it has reached such a threat to the Chinese economy that the government is actively trying to combat lying flat, which is one of the most absurd things to hear.
No, just reading a little thing about it here. Drive towards self-reliance has encountered an unlikely form of resistance in a generation of young Chinese who balk at the Communist Party's high-minded call for a, quote, continued struggle alongside and deeply ingrained culture of overwork without the promise of real advancement. They opted for Tangping, or lying flat. The lying flat movement calls on young workers and professionals, including the middle-class Chinese who are to be the engine of Xi's domestic boom, to opt out of the struggle for workplace success and to reject the promise of consumer fulfillment. This is kind of interesting. For some, lying flat promises release from the crush of life and work in a fast-paced society and technology sector where competition is unrelenting. For China's leadership, however, the movement of passive resistance to the national drive for development is a worrying trend. A threat to ambition at a time when Xi has made grand ambition the zeitgeist of his new era, what he calls his new era, which is what I was kind of heading toward talking about with respect to what's going on in China. The you know, here's the thing. Here's what China wants to do. It wants to displace the United States as the world's superpower. That is job one for Xi. And stuff like this lying flat, like what Sanguine's talking about, the lying flat movement, is absolutely a huge problem. That, plus the fact that his workforce is going to get older, it's going to have a smaller tax base that's going to have to support more and more people. And he's really beginning to freak out about this because his manufacturing and export business, which is how that's what China lives on, is going to, it's not going to vanish, but it's really going to get hurt by the fact that there simply aren't going to be enough people who want to work hard and work the extra hours, work like Japanese people think is normal, and work 60-hour weeks with no real hope of getting ahead. And no rising state can become a hegemon. No rising state can become like the United States if it cannot secure the deference of other states, through probably three things I can think of right offhand. One, being able to coerce people through threats, being able to invite consensus, make alliances, and by establishing international legitimacy. And that's been a more recent thing that's happened with the advent of the UN, and people begin to think that's important. And unless that rising power like China has essentially blunted the United States, that's what it has to do. The efforts to do that are, it's going to be slim and none. It's going to be hard thing to do. And until China has successfully conducted a good degree of what amounts to blunting the ambition and the abilities of the United States to do things, and the United States to build things in its home region, okay, and that's why you're seeing the push to throw out foreigners who, make a certain amount of money. It remains too vulnerable to, like, the United States influence to have the confidence to turn to any other kind of strategy. And so they have to think of in terms of global expansion. That's what they think is going to save them, which pursues both that blunting of the U.S.'s ambitions and building at the global level to displace the United States from international leadership. And so if you take those two, that could provide a rough means for the Chinese Communist Party nationalist elites to climb through the hegemonic ladder to really displace the United States. But that's the way they think of it. They want to. They think of that China has as its due the leadership of the world. They think China, it's just a natural thing. It's a racial thing. It's almost like racial superiority complex. They really do think China is the best. China is better. China should lead the world. China is normal and everything else is a historical aberration, basically.
It all dates back to...
never should have had the amount of influence that it's had.
It all dates back to the fact that when you think of the great powers that arose in the West, you think of Greece and the city-states there, then you think of Rome, then it goes to the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, then the Holy Roman Empire, and France and England and all those, right? Everyone agrees. Sure. Those would be some of the major powers.
The Habsburgs, the Ottomans, all that stuff, yeah.
Yep. So, do you know what the power structure in China looked like at that time, or in Asia looked like when it comes to the largest and most powerful empire? the earliest Grecian city-states to literally just before World War I. Do you know what the power structure looked like? What was the largest empire in the Asian continent?
The largest empire in the Asian continent? What year?
From, like I said, before the, or from about the same time as the earliest Grecian city-states started forming their own.
So
empire
2000 BC, starting at 2000 BC to when?
To the 1900s. Because there's one correct answer throughout that entire time period.
Okay, what's the correct answer?
China.
Well, was the biggest? Yes, the largest unification of warlord city states. Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm. And the Mongols took over China at a certain point, but in China it's still viewed as that being Chinese rule. This is a weird thing when it comes to the cultural look.
Because the word you're looking for is continuity. That's what
yes,
they think that they've had all through the years.
Exactly. They view it as, well, the West has had empire after empire after empire rise and fall.
Yeah.
Asia had China.
And even though the Ming Dynasty was as different from the Song Dynasty as any two countries could be.
Yes. And even though they had the Warring States period, also known as the Three Kingdoms period, because sometimes people like to refer to the Japanese period as the Warring States, other times they will use that term for China. It gets a bit messy, but the Three Kingdoms is a fairly standard way of referring to that time period as well.
And that all came to an end at what point?
The Warring States period?
Yeah.
Or the Warring States period?
Well, no. Chinese dominance and hegemony in Asia. When did that come to an end?
The last emperor was unseated in 1911.
Yeah. Oh, there was a period also. Was that around the same period when a lot of the country was more split up due to different other more European countries' interests?
So
in terms of
that happened a bit before the split. So there's. Okay. I'm trying to remember the exact time frame.
Are you familiar with the Century of Humiliation?
That's what I was just about to bring up.
That they talk about in China and the Treaty of was it Shimonoseki? The Treaty of Shimonoseki with the Japanese, when they basically just surrendered to the Japanese and total humiliation, and then endured what amounted to the Century of Humiliation. But they regard that as an aberration.
Yep.
These guys who are pushing this nationalist crap right now, and these wackos, and it's interesting because there's a lot of China, a lot of the mom and pop kettle in China could give a rat's ass about Taiwan. Mm-hmm. It's really just the nationalist crazies and the party true believers, the guys who run the government. Which, unfortunately, in China, that's most of what appears to the rest of the world as national will.
And we have to be a bit more specific because it's not just the nationalists when it comes to talking about Chinese history means several different groups. So you have the modern Chi-Com nationalists, the Chinese Communist nationalists.
That's who I'm talking about right now.
Yep.
That's all I'm referring to right now. So
I'm just making sure.
I'll say the modern Chinese Communist nationalists. Okay.
Yep.
So the modern Chinese Communist nationalists are the ones who are pushing and believe that recapturing Taiwan would be a tremendous symbolic, at least, and certainly would help their bottom line. Mm-hmm. Gain for them, and they think they can do it like they did with Hong Kong But what they're going to find is they will be militarily resisted by Taiwan. Their blood will be shed. There was almost no bloodshed in taking back Hong Kong, and there was a legal window dressing, at least, with Hong Kong saying, "Well, the lease is up. We knew this was going to happen. Everybody act like ladies and gentlemen. Everything will be okay."
Though they did violate that treaty.
They totally
rather substantially.
But let's not getting back to Taiwan. Taiwan's going to be a different story.
Oh yeah.
And the big unknown, I think the big unknown. I don't mean to sit up here and make these gigantic pronouncements. I sometimes come off as being really sententious, and I don't mean that. But the $64 question is whether or not the United States will back Taiwan against China militarily. And I think the answer to that is no. And I think the answer to that, I even think if Donald Trump was in there, his people would come to him and said, "We've gamed this out. We don't win no matter what." And one thing Donald Trump likes more than anything else is winning. And he will not step into a known losing situation. He would not do it for the cause, I don't believe. He would go with his political advisors and his generals, who would be shrieking at him to stay the hell away from that.
See, I slightly disagree. So
the other thing is, one of the things that he's going to be faced with is we don't have enough money to do that. We don't have enough money to fund that war.
To quickly run through the history so that people can understand why China and mainland are separated. So I'm just going to do a sprint through 100+ years of history with this. This all started about the time that the Qing or Manchu dynasty fell. So like I said, that was in about 1911. The Qing fell. A group started to consolidate China after the collapse of the Qing, which was the nationalists, which were backing a man by the name of Yuan Shikai. Yuan Shikai ended up not being the person that they thought they were backing, because Yuan Shikai named himself president for life, tried to dissolve the assembly that was meant to be their version of effectively Congress, and then tried to name himself emperor. There was
what year are we at right now?
This Yuan Shikai tried to name himself emperor during World War I. It was, I want to say it was
moving it along. Let's get to Chiang Kai-shek.
Yep, which is what I was just about to say. When he was trying to do that, the people that ended up being the leaders of the nationalist movement within China, and these are the nationalists before the current wolf warriors or Chinese communist nationalists, were Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen. They worked together. They were able to gain power as China just completely fractured with Yuan Shikai's death after he tried to name himself emperor. He died 3 months later when it failed. China splintered, just ended up completely dissolving into a bunch of different warlords, each with their own holdings. Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen got the nationalist group together, unified, formed up a military, started convincing the warlords to join them or putting down any warlord that wouldn't. And at this point, they were accepting anyone that was for unified China. This is when the beginnings of the Chinese communists started to pop up.
Mhm.
So they went through, they were able to reunify China. Once they reunified China, Sun Yat-sen, if I remember correctly, he had studied in a bunch of different areas throughout Europe and in the US. And he had some connections to a number of officials in Russia. So he started buddying up to Russia, but he was not a communist. He just started buddying up to Russia as the major power in the area, because China was still fairly vulnerable at this point.
What year are we now?
Were in the 1920s, 1930s.
Okay, so let's move along.
Yep. So they buddied up to Russia. Russia insisted that they allow the Chinese communists to take some additional seats of power within the nationalist government. They did that. They got military officials to come in and advise as they continued to train up their military. At a certain point, Chiang Kai-shek kicked the Russians out and then stripped the Chinese Communist Party of its positions, neutered anyone that was still trying to get the Chinese Communists any sort of control. They split off. And this was about the time that World War I in the East was kicking off, which was the Sino-Japanese War, as it was known until the Allies joined in.
World War One.
Or World War II. Sorry.
Okay, that's going
World
to say.
War II. Yeah. The Sino-Japanese War, that was the beginning of World War II. It was World War II in the East.
And the Japanese at this point were committing amazing atrocities against the Chinese.
This is before the atrocities kicked off. This is when they first grabbed Manchuria.
Right, but later on in the conflict between China and Japan, it's important for the later part of your story after World War II to understand the Sino-Japanese hate that exists between those two countries.
So this was when they first grabbed Manchuria. The Chinese didn't like it, but the Japanese weren't doing the horrendous shit yet. But there was a large portion of the Chinese that were pushing to actively pursue the Japanese as the primary threat. Chiang Kai-shek was believing that it was important, or believed that it was important to unify China completely, so that a unified China could fight Japan as one, rather than having a group of other individuals on their own.
So what did he do?
The other groups were the Chinese communists. He went and tried to push towards taking out the Chinese communists before taking out the Japanese.
Okay.
This war on, he was trying to pursue the Chinese communists. They kept on dissolving each time that he got close. And this resulted in one of his own military officials kidnapping him and holding him hostage until he agreed to turn the full force of the Chinese nationalists against
the
Japanese.
Right.
So when he turned the full force, they started fighting against the Japanese, as Japan also geared up for full-blown war. This is when the really nasty shit started happening. This is when the invasion and then rape of Nanking happened, for instance, which at the time Nanking was the capital of China during the nationalist period. So they start fighting, throwing everything that they have against the Japanese. In this time period, the communists also agreed that they would throw everything that they had against the Japanese. The thing was, of every major battle where it was the Chinese versus the Japanese, the largest Chinese force, hands down, were the Chinese nationalists. In all but one of the battles, the communists were not even the second largest force. Because, like I said, there were a number of other warlords that had also popped up.
Okay.
There were individual
getting too detailed. We're getting too far afield from our major subject. So,
well, this is important because the communists were
speed
doing
us
this
through the years.
Communists were doing this on purpose so that they could conserve their strength biding their time. So the nationalists threw everything that they had at fighting the Japanese. Eventually, the Allies joined the Eastern Front, and the war eventually ended after a lot of blood and toil and hard work was done by mainly the Chinese nationalists.
Yeah, and Chiang Kai-shek's people had enormous losses, both in men and material, as a result of that.
They had bled themselves white.
Yep.
And
while the communists were conserving their power.
Exactly. They were conserving their power, and they, throughout the entire war, what they would do is they would be seen everywhere. Right up until the Japanese were nearby. But as they were leaving, they would make a lot of to-do about how they were going off to fight the Japanese to explain why they weren't there when the Japanese came in. So they would pull back, bring in resources that they had received because they were fighting the Japanese, fighting the good fight. So they grew in number, grew in supplies, grew in power throughout the entire war as the nationalists were bleeding themselves white, fighting the Japanese, actually fighting the Japanese. Once the war ended, Chiang Kai-shek had a very, very short period where he was now the president of China after the Japanese had been rebuffed.
Mm-hmm.
Almost immediately after that, there were some signs of decay within the government because they.
What year are we talking here?
This is now in the 43, 45 range.
Okay. Makes a huge difference because Japan signs the armistice in August of 1945.
Sure, sorry. It's the 44 to like 46 was when I'm thinking, not, I put it back too far. So about 44 to 46 because Japan ended up retreating from a lot of the areas that they controlled in China to conserve power to fight the US. And in that process, Chiang Kai-shek assumed power. He had complete power after 45 when Japan surrendered and ceded its holdings back to China. Mm-hmm. And it was in 46, so about a year, in fact, less than a full year, after the surrender, the communists attacked. And in 3 years, so from 46
by 1949, Mao Zedong's communists take power, and they set themselves up in Beijing.
Yep, in 49, Chiang Kai-shek had lost continental China, and the People's Republic was founded. Chiang Kai-shek,
the Kuomintang, they fled to the island of Taiwan. That's where they formed their own government.
The remnants of the Nationalist Party and nationalist forces fled to Taiwan,
and
vowing
what
that
key
they would
thing
return.
Did Chiang Kai-shek do that was probably a huge mistake? He cut off all contact with mainland China.
Yes. And he kept on launching raids against mainland China, which were not that effective and just caused him to bleed himself a bit more dry.
Mm-hmm. So the United States is at war with Communist China and Korea at this point, by 1950. So Taiwan says, we'll ally with you. And the United States says, fine. And so we actually put a fleet in the Taiwan Strait.
Yep. And that was
to protect Taiwan from the Chi-Coms.
Yep, in 1955, we signed a treat or mutual defense pact, I think is the proper term, where it was if we were attacked, which was just in there for show, that Taiwan would help
they would
us.
help us out. Yeah,
And
it's
if
mutual
Taiwan,
defense pact is what
Yep.
it's called.
if Taiwan was attacked, then we would come in guns blazing. So we had that agreement, and it was in place for just about 20 years, wasn't it, Skep? Before we
1971,
violated a portion of it?
1971 is when we really betrayed Taiwan.
That's when we
in
recognized...
1971, Beijing takes over China's seat at the United Nations, and that had previously been held by Taipei, which means that's just the capital of Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And by 1979, the U.S. establishes diplomatic relations with China. All right, and but at the same time we do that, we recommit to, quote, assist the defense of Taiwan. We backed the policy of one China with Beijing as the legitimate government, but we established trade and military ties with Taipei, and we didn't say what we thought about the reunification efforts, per se. So there's, and then what happens between essentially 1987 and 2016. In late 1987, Taiwan residents are, for the very first time, permitted to visit China. That was huge. Mm-hmm. Okay. That was when you saw the pictures in Life magazine of, and whatever the print media was back then, allowing families to reunite, and families that had not seen each other since 1949, right? Mm-hmm. And so this was, they hadn't seen each other for 38 years, and it also led to a boom in trade. And let me tell you what, both sides made out like bandits. That was one of these things where capitalism really proves how stout and amazing it is at creating wealth. Mm-hmm. When Taiwan and China started trading with each other, they just went to town, and it was really good for both sides. In 1991, Taiwan lifts the emergency rule, unilaterally ending the state of war with China. So they said, we're walking away from the war. And the first direct talks between the two sides, I think, were held 2 years later, if memory serves. Weren't they held in Singapore? Am I remembering that right?
I believe so.
That was in I'm thinking that was in 1993, the Singapore talks. And then that lasted till 95, when that Taiwanese guy came to the United States, and there was some sort of brouhaha, and I don't remember what that was. But anyway, and then 1996, China, wants to make sure Taiwan knows that they are pissed. And so they're testing missiles just off the coast of Taiwan. And they were sending them electronic messages that they felt very strongly that it would be good if Taiwan's people did not vote in the presidential election. That was also Taiwan's first democratic presidential election, was in 1996. Do you know that?
Yes, because for the longest time it was the nationalists were passing it down from, it went from Chiang Kai-shek when he passed away in 75, I want to say he died.
Yeah.
He then passed it to the man that he had groomed to take over, right, which was Yang Khan.
Doesn't matter. Western ears will forget it as soon as we hear it.
And then that was passed a couple years after that to Chiang Kai's son, Chiang Kuo. So
anyway, the scene shifts, right? And in March 2005, Beijing passes a law that makes the secession of Taiwan from China illegal, and that the remedy for it is military action. So basically, are saying we're coming for you, and they had the uh, it must have been an interesting meeting, because also I think it was the same year, or it was the year next year, there was a meeting between the Kuomintang and that's the Taiwan
The Nationalist Party. Yeah.
yeah, and the CCP, the Communist Party of China. So at any rate, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of threats and insults going back and forth. But by 2008, Taiwan and China had resumed high-level talks, and they elected a Beijing-friendly guy. I forget his name. I think his name was Ma. And at any rate, in 2010, they signed an economic cooperation agreement. And in 2014, they actually held the first government-to-government talks since they separated. So by 2015, both leaders are sitting down in Singapore, shaking hands and waving enthusiastically to a huge press. And but they did not issue a joint statement. 2016, that's the end of the honeymoon. It's then opposition candidate Tsai from the traditionally pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party wins the election to become Taiwan's first female president, and she says that democracy is ingrained in the Taiwanese people, and she will strive to maintain stability with China, but we're going to be separate. Thanks. We will work. Here's a quote from her. We will work towards maintaining the status quo for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait in order to bring the greatest benefits and well-being to the Taiwanese people. Mm-hmm. All right. And the day of her inauguration, China cautions that peace would be, quote, impossible, end quote, if she makes any moves to formally break away. And so by June, China was not speaking to Taiwan at all. They'd cut off communications with their new government because she just made speech after speech, that was pro-independence. And then 2016, Donald Trump breaks with decades of U.S. diplomatic policy and spoke directly by telephone to Tsai. Say, he wanted to show how, pro-Taiwan he was. And mm-hmm. the thing about Donald Trump is, and you never really know with him, you might be right. He might just be, nutty enough to take on a war with China over Taiwan.
And it's also when...
But, hang on, let me just finish the sentence.
Yep.
But he's also capable. He's also very capable of making the big splashy the big splash with a phone call with President Tsai, and then completely not doing anything other than selling arms to Taiwan, which is what he did. The next year he sold he approved $1.5 billion worth of arms sale. So that's the thing about it, and China is sitting there watching us sell F-16s to Taiwan and just getting more and more pissed off. And they also know that if we choose to do battle with China, China is going to be at a severe naval disadvantage. Their navy is shite.
Yep.
Every part of it is crap, and our navy is it may be a woke navy, but it's pretty goddamn good at what it does. Mm-hmm. And we can project a lot of power in a very inconvenient fashion. Essentially, we could probably just threaten them out of our war to say, "Hey, I don't want to upset your chow mein there, Mr. China, but we've got 5 nuclear subs sitting off your coast, And all we have to do is press one button and your country vanishes. And you can't do shit.
And the thing is that the way that everything's situated with China and Taiwan, it would be effectively a battle where carriers are necessary in order to field the attacking force. For those who don't know how many carriers there are in the world, there aren't many.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all of them are American.
Yes. So we have 10 times the number of carriers that China has. We have a full 20. The next highest, so the two nations that are the closest to us are Japan and France, that each field 4. Most of our 20 are nuclear, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they are.
So they are effectively just able to float off and say fuck you to everyone, be almost entirely self-sufficient.
Something that Gamer Valentine in chat points out is don't forget about all the planes in Arizona that have a preservation to be ready in 24 hours for wartime effort. So
Yep. The US has 20, China has 2, and I think both of theirs are coal-powered. And they have another...
China cannot even operate their own aircraft carrier. I'm going to short-circuit this a little bit and just tell you that their sea trials were a failure, and they actually had to be towed back to port.
They were Soviet surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is the old. I used to know the name of that. It is one of the old Soviet hulls. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have, I think, 3 that are currently in their naval dry docks that they're working on.
They have 2 operational, they say, and 2 under construction.
It's only 2? Okay.
Yeah, it's
the
only
third
2.
one must be planned.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the third one is the one that they're trying to see if they can make a nuclear carrier.
Yeah.
And the these are the big carriers. We're not talking about pocket carriers. If you talk about pocket carriers, we actually have 11 big carriers, and we have two more under construction. But if you talk about pocket carriers, we've got 9 or 10 more of those. And those things, the F-35s that those pocket carriers have on board are quite capable of delivering a lot of pain.
And Gamer Valine corrects me. It's not both of them are Soviet. It's only one of them Soviet. One of them is the Chinese knockoff of the Soviet.
Oh yeah, that was the one that burned up. That was the one they built themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, they have a few more in dry dock, and Skep confirmed that they're working on a handful more. So with that short history that we just ran through, you can see why China really hates Taiwan, Taiwan really hates China, and also why China hates Japan.
Yeah. One thing I did remember while we were talking about this, there's a Gateway Pundit article from Joe Hoft, I believe. And one of the things he points out effectively is there's things that actually the Department of Defense could do to help ward off any kind of conflict. But basically, it would be a joint operation of between the U.S. and Taiwan for, I believe they call it HADR. And I believe that has more to do with it's the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Response. So basically where we would assist with bringing in supplies and stuff like that, agreeing to stuff like that. If there was an agreement that was signed to do that, especially I guess during wartime, that would probably affect things on a psychological level between the two. So,
but yeah, the reason why I think that we would be more likely to get involved than not if it weren't for the current administration is, did you recently hear, or let me phrase this in the proper ordering of the words. Did you hear the recent threat from China to Japan? Because Japan has made comment that it is backing Taiwan.
Yeah.
Did you hear it at all, Geodes?
No, relatively silent on my end.
So what China said, and this is not me ad-libbing, this is not me hyping it up any. They said that if Japan gets involved, they will nuke Japan and continue to nuke Japan until Japan surrenders or is rendered inhabitable.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see where Japan, their defense guy, said that China was attempting to use its power to, change the status quo, to do the things I was talking about a little while ago, to become the hegemon. And Japan has gone to European countries. I think that's interesting, asking them to, ally with them against China's aggression. And they're warning that if they don't bolster deterrence, against Beijing's military and military-driven territorial expansion, there's a risk of a hot conflict. And that's a very interesting thing. That would be an amazingly that would be a surprisingly dumb thing for China to do, because Taiwan were kind of bound to defend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Japan, we would defend Japan like it was Hawaii.
Oh yeah, we have a treaty that is still 100% active.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact Japan is really important to us. We really would take a hit if Japan gets deeply damaged. That's a bad thing for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We would defend them to the last. We'd turn China into cinder.
And the thing that not a lot of people realize when they're looking at China and how this entire situation is going down is China has made claims on Okinawa of much the same form that they've made on Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, so is Japan.
So is Japan. It is Japan's, just it's also part ours.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But because we never gave it entirely back. We gave it mostly back, but we went, this chunk, no, it's ours. We're just going to make a shit ton of bases on it.
Yeah.
But China has claims that they've made about Okinawa being theirs. So if they are allowed to retake Taiwan, then I think that it would be rather absurd to think that they would stop with Taiwan, because they have claims on Okinawa of the same sort that they've made on Taiwan.
That nice Mr. Hitler just needs a little extra room for his people.
Exactly. As well as, I can't remember the island chain that is Japan's, but China's also making claim on it. That's between.
Are you talking
Japan.
about the Spratlys?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
And both of them have claim on it. It's currently under Japan's control. China's also claimed that. So it seems absurd to me that if China was allowed to take Taiwan, that it wouldn't then continue up the chain and seize more, because they've made claims on those those three locations, as well as chunks of several other countries around them.
I was about to ask, has South Korea made any statements?
South Korea is kind of in the same boat as Japan last I looked into it, where
of course China has such contempt for the Koreans. I think they'll leave them alone. Culturally, I just don't think they're ready to do anything with Korea.
Well, they don't have the same hate on for Koreans as they do for the Japanese.
No, it's contempt. It's a whole different thing.
Mhm.
It's a whole different thing culturally. And the Koreans are held in contempt, interestingly enough, by both the Japanese and the Chinese. They just think they're dogs. They really and they uh, culturally that's been a norm for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And
You want to insult a Chinese guy, just call him a Korean.
Game of Lean, that's what I was saying, that Okinawa is only Japan's because we gave it back to them. Though it has its own weird situation because it is that semi-autonomous government still, but it's under Japanese control. It's a weird setup for Okinawa. But yeah, that's kind of the history of that area and why there's the conflict between the Chai Coms and Chai Nats.
Mhm.
And when it comes down to it, so one of the reasons why people don't really know much about this is China has done one hell of a job trying to memory hole a good chunk of that history and modify what they don't try to memory hole.
Mhm.
So, for instance, as I said throughout that story, during most of World War II, most of that Sino-Japanese war, it was the nationalists, once they had completely turned their attention to the Japanese, they bled themselves white
Mhm.
in the war. The communists did not. If you listen to the communist propaganda, if you listen to their tellings, and you ignore the documents that we have from every other group that had any sort of eyes on the ground, you would think that the Chai Nats had not lifted a finger during the entire war.
Mhm.
Because the Chinese communists make it sound like they were launching constant guerrilla raids as well as actually forming up in rank and taking the fight to the Japanese. Like I said, in only one battle in that entire war, in only one battle, did the Chinese communists even make up the second most numerous force for the Chinese. They were being beaten out by individual warlords.
Mhm. Well, I guess one of the questions I'd ask, and this is just kind of more in general for anybody who's listening, if you had to recommend like a couple of history books to help people understand kind of the history of all this too, aside from just what we're discussing here, but more in detail, what would you recommend?
I'm trying to remember. I have a couple really good ones that I read when I was in college on the matter. I'd need to check my shelf at home in order to see which ones those were.
Okay.
Skep, do you have any off the top of your head that you'd be able to recommend?
Cultures of China by Francis L.K. Hsu. Obviously, that will give you a cultural history from the Chinese side, but that's going to cost you about $200.
What was it called?
Cultures of China, but I can that's just will give you Chinese culture. That won't specifically focus on these. If you're looking for Sino, are you talking about Sino-Japanese relations?
I think he's talking about the Sino-Japanese through Civil War.
Yeah, like basically that, like I said, the history that they kind of have been trying to pretend doesn't exist, is kind of what I'm thinking of. Because it's one of those things where if you can find books like that and study up on that stuff, I think that'd be both fascinating and good to know for the modern day, so.
Mhm.
I don't doubt. There's a book called Untying the Knot, Making Peace in Taiwan or something like this, called Untying the Knot. I remember that. I read part of that, um, and he's actually a friend of mine. The guy who wrote that, the guy who was on the Kansas City with me, is at the Brookings Institute now, and this guy is a buddy of him, and he wrote this book. I think his name is Bush. His last name is Bush.
Richard Bush?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think it's Richard Bush, called Untying the Knot, Making Peace with Taiwan or something like that. Making that was one. There's can't think. There was one from University of Michigan, but that was Chinese economics that I read. That's not the same one.
Okay.
I know the one I was trying to think of is called Dangerous Strait, the U.S. Taiwan China crisis. That's what it is. That's by a guy named Tucker. I just found it. Should be pretty easy to find. If you read those two, you would probably know more than 99.9% of the people in the world about that.
Okay.
And just as a suggestion.
Okay.
I always like recommending the Brookings Institute. They're liberal, but there's some really good thought that comes out of there. Their website is fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway, getting back to this. I'm sorry, where were we?
So we were just okay.
We were just finishing the decision about whether, or the set of questions as to whether or not the U.S. would intervene on Taiwan's behalf.
Yeah, if we had
sensible, if we came in and did it on an intimidation basis, the problem is we would have to be willing to follow through with that. Right now, the United States is just tired of spending blood and treasure on other people's countries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that a president can get elected under that circumstances. I think any president in the 2024 election is going to have to pledge no more foreign wars. They're going to have to sign up for that.
The problem is that you have if we have intelligent leadership, which is a big goddamn if, sadly. But if you have intelligent leadership, they would realize that we have two choices when it comes to whether or not to get involved in the matters of Taiwan. And that is, you can choose, no, we will not go to war for now, but we will end up in a much larger war very shortly. A damn near third world war. Or we could go to war now. We could go to the fight now. And it'll suck because we're in a fight. But it won't be a third world war.
Inevitably, they're going to draw parallels between Chamberlain's situation prior to World War II, the peace in our time guy.
Yep.
And our position today.
Yep.
I think we'll. The thing about peace in our time, it always sounds too good to resist.
Yeah. Well, there is one. This is the only argument I really have against like the pure isolationist mindset, and that is, if you're talking about like spheres of influence in terms of ideas, for example, like I mean, the perfect example we're talking about right here is China.
You cut off after China.
Okay. Communist China and how they're pushing out their ideas in or their influence in various ways. Both the U.S. and Canada can probably name several examples, from them buying up land in or rental properties, I guess, in Toronto, to influencing businesses here in the United States, such as like the NBA or gaming companies. A pure isolationist mindset, the only issue with is nobody else is going to really do that. They'll want to spread out and control more. And so while I agree with the idea of we don't need to be involved in most wars, there is a certain thing of we do need to at least exert some influence insofar as trying to protect our allies, at least to some extent. So, and this is where I usually disagree with this is where I start to have a little bit of friction with the pure isolationist mindset that I tend to see in much more hardcore libertarian viewpoints. So, yeah.
See, the thing about isolationism is it sounds like it could be nice, but it ends up almost completely ignoring the actual situation of the world.
But here's the problem with isolationism. If you disregard what is going on in the world, even to the point of dissociating yourself from the rest of the world will come knocking at your door, and it may not be on a friendly basis. So the argument against isolationism, at least pure isolationism, is that you have to have some sort of interaction with the world to keep relationships and relations at a healthy level with other countries. You have to kind of, the relationships between people don't go that well in the first place. They don't work. They need lubrication. It's like gears that get sand in them. That they just don't work very well, and you need plenty of oil and things to make the gears mesh smoothly. And if you isolate, you pull the gears away from each other. When they slam back together again, the odds of them operating in a harmonious and well-ordered fashion are slim and none. And typically in times past, when communication has vanished for a while, war has always ensued, and that may happen. That may happen eventually with the United States and China if we both have objectives that we will commit the military to attain, and those conflict. We're going to have a battle. We're going to have a war with China. And that war could turn ruinous, particularly if one side decides to escalate into the nuclear capacity. And what will happen is that will happen when one side gets desperately close to being mortally hurt.
Yep.
When it gets close, that's the way this game's out. And when that happens, boy, all bets are off. The risk becomes very high of real damage to our world.
And it still pisses me off. I get why certain ideas were shot down in the past, but it still pisses me off that the idea of let's develop a defense system against nukes was shot down so goddamn hard. Because that we need to get that. It's not a matter of, well, it's just a way of showing off your dick, laying it all out, and let's get out the tape measures. No.
Well, that's what came out. That's what came out in the press. In point of fact, the reason that we probably didn't do that is because it costs a whole bunch of money
Oh yeah.
to make a certain advance in that area and not very much money to defeat that advance. And then you have to put out the whole big amount of money again. It's a leapfrog thing. One side gets ahead, then the other side gets ahead.
Yeah,
And
it's the arms
in
race of
that,
weapon and defense.
yeah, but what they found with those types of weapons is the potential for research-driven solutions to anybody's technological advancements were not high enough to prevent them from making them, and therefore it wasn't a fruitful path to go down. It'd be great if we could, get something that was ironclad, absolutely would defend, against missiles. The problem is they just make a better missile, a different missile, having different electromagnetic characteristics or different flight characteristics, or breaks into 2,000 warheads instead of one. Just too many ways to defeat that.
Well,
I know that it would be a constant arms race the moment that tech is developed and widely known to have been developed.
But you'll never reach the objective. That's the point. You'll never hit the objective of the research.
Well, there's also, I know this probably wouldn't amount to much in terms of if we go into the nuclear stage of warfare, but doesn't Japan actually have their own version of the Iron Dome?
Well, yeah, I don't know if that's a good question. I can actually look on a site I know. Let's see. They have a missile defense system, and it's one of the things that they always think about North Korea. I remember something about that. They could, let's see. I wonder if they don't have anything. Well, let's see. Well, let's look at different France, Italy, UK. No. Other developments. Japan. All right. In 2018, the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force initiated their 54th year of Hawk system and missile training. And so they have been training at the United States at Fort Bliss and also in New Mexico. And they've been using PAC-3 Patriot missiles. And they achieved a 100% kill rate for the group that trained in the United States that goes back to train their own. Since 1998, when North Korea launched a Taepodong 1 missile over northern Japan, the Japanese have been jointly developing new surface-to-air interceptor known as a PAC-3, Patriot Advanced Capability 3, with the U.S. So far, tests have been successful. There are 11 planned locations for PAC-3 to be installed in Japan. Military spokesman said that tests have been done on 2 sites, one of them a business park in central Tokyo, and also in Ichigawa, a site not far from the Imperial Palace. Along with the PAC-3, Japan has installed U.S.-developed Aegis ship-based anti-ballistic missile system, but that's Sea Sparrow. I almost guarantee you that's Sea Sparrow.
And Gamer
which is a damn good one.
Gamer Verleen says that their defense system is tied to the U.S. air alert systems.
Yeah.
And in terms of getting their due data, their distant early warning data. Yes.
Yeah. She says that. Yeah. She also mentions the storage here as automated. She did also apparently send you some stuff on Twitter, I guess, related to this Skep issue.
Thank you so much, Gamer Verleen. You're the best. Gamer Verleen has interesting service history on it. For those of you, I'd be interesting to talk to her sometime. Love to have you on, Gamer Verleen.
Yeah, that would be fun as hell.
Yeah. So at any rate, yeah, they definitely are active in that. They have developed some stuff both on their own and from, but it's basically based on the Patriot template, and that's in 2020. Japan scrapped plans to buy the land-based Aegis Ashore system from the U.S. as just saying that it was too time-consuming, so they're going to stick with the Patriot, which I can understand. That Aegis was developed for ships primarily. So anyway, yeah, that's but that's what all I know about. All I can find about Japan's anti-missile thing. But they, one thing about it, I can guarantee the Japan, they're very aggressive about defending their little island, and
especially since the only sort of quasi-military force that they're able to have is their
defense force.
Defense
it's called
force.
The Japanese Defense Force. Yeah.
Yep, the JDF.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the.
For those who don't know why they're only allowed the JDF, it is due to the peace treaty after World War II. Part of the peace treaty is that they aren't allowed to have any offensive military element, but in exchange for their complete lack of offensive military elements, they have the U.S. as their augmented defense, as it were. Whoa! Background sound just snapped in with you.
Yep.
Sorry.
Not a problem.
Somebody's trying to take a weed whacker to your microphone. Sorry.
Yeah, it just snapped in. I think it's auto gaining on you when you go quiet for a little bit. But yeah, it was due to the way that they had come to terms with the peace treaty at the end of World War II. They aren't allowed to have an offensive military force, but the U.S. at the very least, and it might be the U.S. and one or two of the other allies, are bound by that peace treaty to come to their defense.
Mm-hmm.
Is this better?
A little bit.
Once you started speaking, it became better.
Yeah, it's the problem is that I have a buzzing fan in my laptop.
Yep.
And that's the buzz that you're hearing. It's not electronic. That's just acoustic. So sorry about that.
Not a problem. Like I said, I think it's just the mic turning up its gain when you went quiet for a moment there.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I actually have that turned off, but it may be turned back on. I did reboot my computer. I don't know if I got some defaults reset. I'll check it. But anyway.
Yes, Gamer Valine, that is the reason why we told them that they aren't allowed to have an offensive military force, because they did have a nasty habit of, it's been like a year, let's try to take someplace over again. Where is it? Oh, it just picked up again. Say something, Skep.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can.
Once you start speaking, it goes back down. When you stop speaking, it goes back up.
That's interesting. I wonder what it's picking up.
Just
All
to double check, if you click on the gear on the bottom, click on the audio. Do you have it set to automatically adjust mic volume?
Hang on.
Audio settings on StreamYard?
No, I don't know if it resets every time I come in.
It might.
Then so cam, microphone, integrated webcam. Okay, audio is no, it's unchecked. It is unchecked.
Unchecked? Ah,
Yeah.
that's strange.
So I can turn my mic volume up like this. Can you hear me more now? Or I can turn it down like this. Is this too soft?
That's a little bit too soft. Turn
Okay.
it up a little bit.
How
There we
is
go.
this?
That's
Right there?
yep.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. But I have nothing turned on. I don't have the stereo auto. I don't have echo cancellation. I don't have automatically adjust mic volume is turned off. Everything is turned off, which is what I would expect. That's what I would do.
Okay.
I'm not completely unaware of how this stuff works. At least anyway. No, I think this is 100%. This is 100% acoustic that's happening.
Yep.
And there's also something else bad that happens with a connector. If I move my mic, it's liable to interrupt my audio connection. It basically resets the audio state and mutes me. But that's something else. Yeah, it's great. Anyway, I'm giving hard thought at this point to a new laptop. This one's only 4 years old, and I hate that. But it's you should get a lot more out of a laptop in 4 years. I'm trying to talk myself into you could really use it as a file server. Wouldn't it be nice to have a nice desktop, really powerful desktop with a double throwdown GPU and all that stuff?
I will say, in my experience, Skep laptops these days are just not worth it. So,
yeah. Why do you say it? I'm actually very interested in your opinion.
So, the laptop I'm currently on, because my desktop is still being worked on a bit, but this laptop was originally bought to do my programming homework for college, and this included having to do some 3D modeling and a couple of other things because I was about to do a game development course.
So it's got a heavy duty graphics circuitry. Is the graphics separate or is it on chip?
Yeah, I think it's on chip. I'm not sure, but this is the thing. In theory, it's supposed to do that. When I actually tried to do anything with it, it proceeded to crash anytime I ran a program like Blender or Autodesk. So it was, and currently right now, I've tried plugging in a CD reader, for example, just to install some drivers off of a CD for a printer. It wouldn't even detect the CD reader at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it will detect.
What brand of laptop do you have?
Yeah, I have Alienware. I forget. I think it's an R15 or something like that. I'd have to look at the exact brand again, but it's a few years old. It's probably from 2015. I want to say. Yeah.
That's about that's close to the vintage of this one. I guess this is what 2016, 17.
Yeah,
I made pissed off.
Yeah, I made the mistake of buying this because I'd heard for years that Alienware was good, but I think I got them shortly around the time that their brand started to decline.
Yeah. I remember Alienware. They were just an assembler of things. They didn't do any manufacturing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Did they? I think they just bought components and,
I honestly don't know. I'm not that familiar with company histories in terms of where they started to assemble or how they got started. I do know that I think by the time I bought this one, they had already been bought out by Dell, and I'm
okay.
Or if they were bought out by Dell, or at least the Dell started to go downhill. I don't know if they were owned by that point already, or if they were a branch off of Dell at the very beginning. But this is, like I said, I'd heard for years that Alienware was good, and I have yet to be proven that is the case. So.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to turn the whole stream over to when I type into Alienware, it says computer hardware company, but I just get the Dell Alienware desktop computers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great deals every day.
Yeah.
Alienware is an American computer hardware subsidiary of Dell. Their product range is dedicated to gaming computers, which can be identified by their alien-themed designs. So they're basically a nameplate now.
Yeah.
And Game Overlean says quite emphatically, do not buy a desktop yet. AMD is going up in price because of the drought in Taiwan, is causing issues with the TSMC making shortages, and Intel is dropping a new socket for chips this quarter.
Yeah,
So-
that's. I knew about the Intel deal. I know that that's coming up because Harry told me about it. And yeah, Game Verleen's talking the current Intel socket wasn't powerful enough for the bigger 10 nanometer chips, so it was scrapped after 2 generations, and that's not wrong.
I did recently buy an AMD processor, but the motherboard is where I'm struggling, so I'll have that fixed hopefully within the next few weeks. So we'll see.
Hopefully, you bought the processor before the price increase that she's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You just, you hope you don't have to be a board level technician anymore. I mean, I thought my days of pen testing chips were over, but I guess no.
Yeah, it never ends, Skep. It never does.
I feel the grave calling me. But anyway, appreciate that, Game of Lean. That's interesting information. You're kind of an interesting person. I think the bunch of us would love to have you on a stream sometime. Let me know if you're interested. You're welcome on my show anytime.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about all kinds of interesting things, as does Sanguine. And any of us, I'm sure, would enjoy having you on. But,
And in fact, speaking of interesting topics, just to announce this to those watching, next week on Friday will be a special topic show, as I sometimes do. Next week's topic will be Wars of Invasion and why the hell aren't they a thing currently? So we'll be talking about that. I believe Skep has signed up to be on next week for that topic, as well as Prospero, and I'm grabbing a couple other people. And this, again?
No, I had talked with Prospero about being on that. That sounds like an interesting topic.
Yep. And this one is a fairly good lead into that one, because if we fail to engage in any shenanigans going on with Taiwan, that will entirely change my position for next week's show.
Mm-hmm.
Because it will mark a bit of an end to the Anglosphere's firm stance of no, you aren't allowed to invade places.
Yeah, there's that. But at any rate, in other news, saying when I actually thought of you today, I was in the process of hanging up my military sword, the sword I received when I was commissioned an officer. And
I was worried there for a moment.
I thought you. No, I'm not going to end it all. I thought of you. I thought Sam would probably be pretty interested in my sword.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually very plain. It's it has nothing. It's not ornate. It does have the rope handle, and the it's pretty cool. It's interesting when it's actually not referred to as a sword. It's called a saber.
Mm-hmm.
And the if you want one, you can buy one for about $350.
Mm-hmm.
I got mine is a lot plainer. The handle filigree and stuff is a lot plainer than the ones that they're selling these days.
Mhm.
And but the best one, the one you really want, is the NCO Saber for the Marines.
The Saracen sword.
Yes, this fucking Saracens. God damn, that's awesome.
I know you know the origin of that sword. Geodes, do you happen to know the origin of the Marine Saracen sword?
Tell the tale, Sanguine.
I don't know, so feel free to indulge.
So, the origin of the Marine Corps sword being the Saracen sword is something that's actually even mentioned in the Marine Corps hymn. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. So this was during. It was the late, not late. It was I want to say 1900s. Was that when? Let me quickly double check the date.
1902, if you want, is the date you're looking for.
1902. So
yeah.
For those who aren't familiar with a group known as the Barbary Pirate States, they were a group of Afro-Arabic private states, or pirate states, sorry, not private, pirate states in northern Africa that from about the time of the Moorish conquest of Spain up until 1902 were raiding much of Europe for slaves. And by raiding much of Europe, I mean they landed in England at several points, raided towns, took people, and sold those people into slaves. This is during a time period when England was the undisputed masters of the sea.
Yeah.
They were getting raided by the Barbary pirates.
They also would take hostages.
Yep.
They'd kidnap hostages and demand ransom, and they killed them if the ransom was not forthcoming.
Yep. So they raided all up and down Europe, going to, I think their farthest location that they raided fucking Ireland for slaves. And they also raided down the coast of Africa and just had this massive area. They would take American ships once America became a thing. They would raid anything that they could, take ships, take them as prizes, take their crew as prisoners, sell their crew back, or sell their crew as slaves, execute a fair number of people. Just an absolute goddamn menace. Mm-hmm. So, the end of the 1800s into the 1900s, the English and the Americans were getting pissed at all this fucking raiding. So, even though we were still kind of knocking heads at this point, we both looked at each other and went, "You thinking what I'm thinking? Let's fuck them up. Let's fuck them up." So we had a joint military action, effectively, where it was the English and the Americans decided that they were going to go and fuck up the Barbary states. The primary port city and their main stronghold was Tripoli. It was a fairly long siege and blockade of Tripoli, if I remember correctly.
It was. And now, understand, they were operating out of, like, Rabat and Algiers and Tunis as well. That whole string of ports all along the Mediterranean. At one point, didn't they have, like, 20,000 imprisoned slaves in the Algiers?
Yes, they had.
I think I remember that.
They had an obscene number of slaves that were one of the largest slaver empires, effectively.
Oh, they were by far the largest ever.
And they were the longest living as well, if I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, from 17th to 19th century.
Well, longer than that. Like I said, they started their ratings of Europe.
1559 is the first report.
That's the first report of them identifying.
From the Spanish and Portuguese guys.
Yes, that's them identifying them as the Barbary. But the area, like I said, had been raiding Europe since about the time of the Moorish conquest of Spain. We're talking over a millennia of raiding.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the English and Americans decided to fuck them up. They went and they started just sweeping through the Barbary strongholds until they came upon Tripoli, which was their main stronghold and the one that they were the most hell-bent on maintaining. And over the siege, the Marines had been one of the primary forces fighting. They had been sent time and time again. They had pushed up, gained a stronghold, then pushed back, pushed up, foothold, pushed back, time and time again, until eventually they were able to gain and hold.
Okay.
And when it became obvious to the commander for the defense that they were going to lose, they surrendered. So it was common practice at the time that when you surrendered your sword. This man, being a Afro-Arabian, his sword of choice was the Saracen sword, which had been the style of sword dating back to damn near the Crusades for most of the Arabian domain. So when he surrendered his sword, he surrendered it to the Marines. The Marines took everything that they were supposed to, and they, after this, since it was one of the largest victories for the Marines, and I just double-checked the date, it's a correction, 1804 was the year of this. So 1804 that they took this, they were given the Saracen sword upon surrender, and the Marines decided that since this was one of the largest victories that the Marines had had, because these fuckers had been raiding Europe for over millennia, or for about a millennia, and had been raiding the Americans, they decided that they were going to immortalize it. And the way that they immortalized it was they took that style of sword as their sword. So it became the in vogue thing that Marines would carry the Saracen sword, and then it became the standardized sword of the Marines. So now it is Marines wield a Saracen's sword.
That all happened during Thomas Jefferson's administration.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating to think. That's the kind of thing that he had to pay attention to.
Yep. It was the second battle of the Tripoli harbor is the specific battle. That
the American squadron joined a Swedish flotilla under Rudolf Söderström, blockading Tripoli, the Swedes having been at war with the Tripolitans since 1800. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They, In 1802, in response to Jefferson's request for authority to deal with pirates, Congress passed an act, quote, an act for the protection of commerce and seamen of the United States against Tripolitan cruisers, authorizing the president to, quote, employ such of the armed vessels of the United States as may be judged requisite, in other words, anything you want, for protecting effectually the commerce and seamen thereof on the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, and adjoining seas. The statute authorized American ships to seize vessels belonging to the Bay of Tripoli, with the captured property distributed to those who brought the vessels into port. And basically, good hunting, fellows. Go have fun.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. Navy went unchallenged on the sea, but still the question remained undecided. Jefferson pressed the issue the following year with an increase in military force and deployment of many of the Navy's best ships to the region throughout 1802. The Argus, the Chesapeake, the Constellation, the Constitution, the USS Enterprise, the Intrepid, the Philadelphia, the Vixen, the President, the Congress, the Essex, the Adams, the Nautilus, the Scourge, the Siren, and the Hornet all saw service during the war under the overall command of the Chief of Naval Operations, basically, back then.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout 1803, they set up and maintained a blockade of the Barbary ports and executed a campaign of raids and attacks against the city's fleets. That's really kind of fun. It's really kind of a great history.
Mm-hmm.
And
one of the heroes of the second battle of Tripoli Harbor is a man who, if you're a really big War of 1812 buff, then you might recognize this name, Stephen Decatur.
Decatur.
Decatur is another way of pronouncing it, yes. He was one of the men that was in charge of the American force. He was a lieutenant at the time, and he was sent in one of the raiding parties into the...
Oh, let me tell the story. It was on the night of February 16th, 1804, a small contingent of U.S. Marines and a captured Tripolitan ketch that had been rechristened the USS Intrepid and led by Lieutenant Stephen Decatur were able to deceive the guards on board the Philadelphia and float close enough to board the captured ship. Decatur's men stormed the vessel and decimated the Tripolitan sailors standing guard. To complete the daring raid, Decatur's party set fire to Philadelphia, denying her use to the enemy. Philadelphia had been captured by the pirates. Decatur's bravery in action made him one of the first American military heroes since the Revolutionary War. The British Admiral, Horatio Nelson, himself known as a man of action and bravery, is said to have called this the most bold and daring act of the age. Even Pope Pius VII said the United States, though in their infancy, have done more to humble the anti-Christian barbarians on the African coast than all the European states had ever done. And that was because of Steve Decatur and his daring nighttime raid.
So that left out one of the parts that I remember that is the most fascinating to me, because in this raid, it went tits up rather quickly. Because it encountered almost immediate fierce resistance from the fighters on the additional ships in the harbor. He boarded 2 enemy gunboats with his boarding party, engaged in close quarters fighting with pistols and sabers. And at one point, he was tackled by a pirate, was wrestling the man as they were rolling about in the middle of the fight, shot the man in the back as they were in a clinch, and the spent bullet passed entirely through the man he had just shot, ending up lodged in his clothing. So he shot the man after pulling out his pistol mid-clinch in a fight, in a wrestling match on board a ship's deck in the middle of a battle, shot the man in the back. It passed entirely through that man and ended up in his, effectively, naval coat. Because it passed entirely through that man, just stopped in his...
Those bridge coats are badass.
Yeah.
I've worn one. I wore one for 5 years. They're heavy. They're heavy.
Yep.
Definitely.
Pretty thick.
Gamer Valentine chat says, "Holy hell, Sanguine! Just saying, I'm from Maryland, and you pronounce certain things like "oh" similar to the way I used to. How'd you mistake the car? We seem to be literal in pronunciation in Maryland."
Yeah. No, it is Decatur. I promise.
Decatur,
But,
okay.
yeah. His father was actually a famous Commodore, which is the equivalent of a brigadier general in the Army. During the Revolutionary War, and distinguished himself. So the family is extremely distinguished in terms of military service in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Nice.
Anyway, so yeah, a bunch of cities named after him. But you guys have spent a little over 2 hours of your lives listening to us prattle on about China and interesting swords. But thank you, chat, for coming out and listening to us. And thank you, Sanguine, for having an old man on your show. It's been great fun.
Always good. Do you want those to be your parting words, or do you have anything in addition that you want to say?
Let's see. I thought I had something. You all talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right there. Let's see.
Yes, my pronunciation is rather strange. I have a bastard of an accent. Some things are pronounced in ways in areas that I've lived where it makes sense for them to be pronounced that way. Other bits are just, how the fuck did that accent become part of yours? No clue. And yes, it is Decatur, but I always have fun whenever I see that name, pronouncing it Decatur.
I'm just bad at names. So.
I will let my final words be this. It just those of you who know me know that my son is a Marine, and Sanguine's parents are both Marines, both CW05s.
Nope, one was a full bird, one was a CW05.
No, that's right. One was CW05, one was and so an 05 and a CW05. It's kind of awesome. But anyway, the upshot of this is that the Marine Corps is like America's little pit bull. They feed them. America mistreats them, and every now and then they let them out to attack somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved that saying about the Marine Corps. They really do. They are the hardiest, scariest group of people. They're your best friend and your worst enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still find it hilarious that they're the only branch of the military that was literally made by a bunch of drunken men in a tavern.
You're not wrong.
Everyone else,
wrong.
Act of Congress. The Marines, bunch of drunk people in a tavern deciding, you know what? Fuck the English. They keep on taking our ships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They really needed, it's the old power projection thing. They needed a way to project military power, and it wasn't just enough to have sailors out there who were competent to run the ships and handle the technological part of being at sea. You needed guys who were specialists at fighting them. It's just really specialization more than anything. But anyway, I'll let you shut it down. Those are my final words.
Yes.
Be sure to catch us tomorrow on Harry's stream. I'll be there to notate things, and also check out Sanguine's YouTube channel when you get the chance. He does a lot of cooking videos. So
absolutely,
it's been a while since the last one I've done, but I will be restarting doing cooking videos here, and I will let everyone know where they can find them when I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll leave off with, because I rather enjoy this toast and it's used far too little, Here's to cheating, here's to stealing, here's to fighting, and here's to drinking. If you cheat, may you cheat death. If you steal, may you steal a woman's heart. If you fight, may you fight for a brother. And if you drink, may you drink with me.
Amen.
And with that, have a good night, all. The zoo is closed.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.